Really honored to be here. I've always heard about NIFE, and a couple weeks ago, they reached out and asked if I would present on the cooling system, and I said yes, of course I would. So what a privilege. All right, so first I'm going to go through a brief introduction. Great. In case you guys haven't heard of me before, my name is Austin. I've had a Fiero about 10 years. I'll just go through about a couple of minute presentation on myself real quick to get acquainted. I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you guys too. So about me, well, I have a 1988 GT. I have a Series 3 supercharged motor in it. I've done extensive modifications to the car. Recently, I've intercooled it and also converted it to E85. It has a camshaft, heads, small pulley, and so on. I'm also getting the tuning right now too. I saw my first Fiero when I was around 10, I think, and I had to ask my parents what it was, and they said, "Well, that's a Fiero," and I knew I had to have one ever since. I think it was a white notchback that I first saw. Fun story about that. Well, when I was young, I wanted one when I was around 18 years old, and I could have afforded one too, but my parents did not allow me to buy one. So I just kind of waited it out a little bit. One time when I was looking a couple years later for a gas saver, believe it or not, and I was looking for cars, and there was nothing out there that I really liked that was rear-wheel drive. And I remember my childhood dream of a Fiero. Found one on Craigslist and bought it the next day from a pawn shop. Never even met the original owner. And I've also been making videos since I was in junior high. So I don't know, I don't put the most effort into them, but I do enjoy it. Over here are my different logos that you might see. Last year, I kind of revamped a bunch of stuff and gave it a little bit more effort. Here's some other projects that I've done over the years. I've lifted a pickup truck and a Jeep. I've also got a Plymouth as well in the garage. And if you wanted to check out my YouTube video, my YouTube channel, I've got videos about a lot of that stuff. Okay, so this is kind of my intro into the Fiero community. In 2017, I think, I reached out to Vertical Doors Incorporated, and I bought a kit of theirs and installed it. And I then thought, you know what if I record this and see if they'll sponsor a video? And they did. So I actually get commission on sales from their kits, and I negotiated a 30% off of their kits from their website. So for the record, these, from what I understand, these presentations will be uploaded to the NIFE website later on. I have links throughout all of the presentations to any of the content that I'm going to address today. So my other claim to fame would probably be the 3800 swap instructions. James is going to be presenting on this next month. But if you want to do it yourself, I wrote an entire step-by-step DIY guide, starting back in 2017 again. It originally started out as just a little parts list, but it has evolved into everything that you need for the swap for every combination of Fiero and 3800 out there. Step-by-step videos, all the pictures and diagrams, wiring harness, torque sequences, and links to my other content as well on other modifications. I still actively improve this. In fact, I was just working on it a little bit yesterday. Right now, I have just launched in the last couple of weeks a customizable build sheet. If you want to just come in here and look at what is involved in a 3800 swap, you can look at the options and decide if that's right for you, and just put together a sheet describing your build. It has pricing and everything in it right now. So that's brand new, just fresh off the press. I also have a swap playlist on my YouTube about every step to do the swap. So real briefly, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do have a lot of other videos, probably 30 or 40 of them. I'm currently still working on an E85 conversion and a 3800 intercooler video. But basically, any kind of Fiero repairs or modifications, I'm usually all over that stuff. and I have quite the list of modifications I have recorded over the years. Last year, I had the privilege of getting a partnership with Amazon, and I have since launched a Amazon recommendation store. And I also have a partnership with eBay now too, and a few other places. So if you click on a link that I suggest for my 3800 projects or any video description, I actually make a little bit of a commission on that now. If you end up purchasing the part. So again, where you can find some of these things are my 3800 swap instructions, and every one of my videos, I will always have the part links in the description. You can also go to Amazon. Amazon has, I have some just part summaries lists of lots of different things here. So if you see, you go to my Amazon storefront, I've got, let's see, Fiero paint project, Fiero drag racing, Fiero mods, 3800 mods, Fiero swapping tools, and so on. So if you come in here, you know, you can help yourself to whatever you want, but these are parts that I typically have used myself or bought in the past and would recommend now. I try to stick to Delco stuff if possible, or Delphi, but sometimes they are not making parts anymore. Yeah, so, and also I will do some consulting for you for free even if you'd like. However, I will take anything you will throw my way through PayPal donations. Well, okay, so here is how to get in contact with me and how to support me further. So I have Facebook page. You're welcome to message me there anytime. I do have a new Facebook supporters group that just launched on Facebook. It's a brand new thing. Nobody's in there yet. And then I have a YouTube channel, and you can also join a YouTube supporters group. I do have some supporters in there. I can be reached by email. I don't check that super often, but I will occasionally. If you need a quick response, Facebook's the way to go. And then again, PayPal, Amazon, and if you want, I can even reply to you on Pinox Fiero forum. If you go to my thread and reply to that, or reply to me, or send me a private message on that platform. So, okay, so let's get to the main meat of the presentation today: the Fiero cooling system repair and modification. So. Today we're going to talk about other cooling system articles that I'm not going to cover today because there are already a lot of good articles out there. Cooling system 101, just what does a cooling system do and how is it configured? Diagnosis and repair of the system, upgrades, and then questions, and again, contact. So these topics I'm not going to cover at all today. Maybe you might briefly touch on some, but there are already some really good write-ups out there on the Fiero cooling system. NIFE actually has a lot of them. There's the first 3 there from you guys. Actually, there's at least 5 in there from you guys, 6 maybe. So they have there's a few articles out there about changing the water pump, burping, the pegging temperature gauge fix, and so on. A couple myths, the cooling fan switch, and engine codes. So I'm not going to cover those extensively today since there's already good content out there. Okay, so what is a cooling system and what does it do? Well, it starts with the engine running or the engine turning. It will drive a belt, and that belt drives a coolant pump typically. There are some exceptions to that rule. But the coolant pump will circulate coolant once the engine heats up and the thermostat opens up. Thermostat, all it does is it just blocks the passage until it's warm enough. And then coolant will circulate in the loop, and it will go from the radiator, or from the engine to the radiator. It will be cooled off by the air flowing through the radiator, and then back into the pump and recirculate back through the engine. It does actually get a little bit diverted to the heater core as well. So at a set temperature, the fan will typically turn on. Now this picture doesn't describe that because this picture has either a direct drive or a clutch drive fan, and the Fiero is an electric fan. So the Fiero has a few extra components that this diagram does not have. The Fiero is going to actually have a electric relay and a temperature control switch, and it's also going to have a temperature gauge, all electronic. The temperature control switch will come on, and it will turn the fan on at a certain temperature, increasing cooling through the radiator. And it will also turn off once it has lowered the temperature enough to the right set points. Yeah, and then that process basically just repeats over and over. So I'm gonna discuss some symptoms of some issues real quick. There's overheating. I would say when you get about 230 degrees Fahrenheit or above, that is considered overheating. You can probably get a little bit hotter than that and still be okay, but if you do get too hot, you could end up warping your engine block, and that will cause unsealing head gaskets and leaks and possibly even cracking. Well, cracking is more common if you let your coolant freeze. You might see some light frothy brown oil as a result of this and some white exhaust smoke. Another symptom is it won't warm up. Your thermostat could fail and it could get stuck. Stuck in the closed position. There are some fail-safe ones that do get stuck in the open position, though. Coolant could be discolored, thick, or smelly. It could just be old or mixed improperly with other coolants. Your cooling system could be low pressure, under 13 psi. That's a sign of your water pump dying or you having issues with your coolant consistency. Your fans might not come on. That could be the relay or the fan motor or the temperature switch. Or you could have some gurgling or surging, that meaning that your coolant could be low. And obviously that would be caused to a leak or possibly burning coolant from overheating earlier. Or you could get some engine codes. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is what I could come up with in a short time. So, all right, diagnosis and repair, quick tip. So before we get started, is your Fiero overheating? Turn your heater on to get home. This is a secondary radiator. In fact, turn it on full. So turn the heater on, crank it all the way up to hot, and turn the fan on high. Just try not to sweat too much. And are you slowly leaking coolant? Well, just add some water, distilled water preferably. If you're in a pinch and can't find any, then you can add regular water, although I might opt to change that out when you get home. And do you need help on repairing? Try the Fiero factory service manuals. Detroit Iron has recently just started reproducing them. I have them, and they are extremely good for describing repair processes. Sometimes a little bit too good, because I don't know. It seems like an engineer wrote them, and they account for like everything possible. So they're not very brief, is what I'm getting at. Anyways, okay, so let's go over some common issues with the Fiero system. So first off, diagnosis and repair: crushed tubes from jacks. So common problem with Fieros is that they have some jack points, some funny jack points, and if you take them in to get serviced, not every technician might be familiar with the safe jack points on these cars, and it's very common to accidentally jack it up and crush a coolant pipe, because they are actually very close to some actual jack points. I actually do have some dings in my pipes, and so there's some pictures here on the left. You might want to just look underneath your car, and you can see these two big silver pipes running all the way from the front to the back, and see if there's any crush marks any way along it. Common parts are right behind the radiator, and another one would be right behind the firewall, where I see them crushed most often, at least from pictures on the internet, because I've only had one or two Fieros. So there are some solutions to this. Rodney Dickman, he is retiring, so you might want to grab this stuff fast. He does make a couple different options. He makes some patch kits on replacing sections of these coolant pipes, and the Fiero store still makes only some options of brand new pipes all the way back for 85 to 87. So Rodney covers the installation of those pretty well, so I'm not going to cover that today. And here is a picture from the old Ogre's Cave. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but Ogre's Cave was a really good website, and it has recently gone down, but you can still get to it from the web archive. So I pulled this picture out of there, and this is the safe jack points that he has a diagram of. I'm not sure where this came from, but it was on his website. So just so you know where to jack your car up from to avoid crushing the pipes. All right, next common issue is worn baffles and seals. So you have radiator seals around the radiator. They're some sort of a molded rubber, and they could get dry rotted or cracked, or if you have a collision or something, they could get torn or wrecked. All you got to do to figure out if they're in good shape is stick your head underneath the front bumper. If you've got a GT like me, the Aero nose has, I think, different seals than the regular nose. I'm not sure the regular nose has any, but because I haven't looked at one in a long time. But you can still get replacements for these. The Fiero store also makes these as well, and they're pretty good. I have a video on replacing these. In fact, it's the same video as my radiator install video that I will talk about later. But yeah, just pop your hood open, see if there's your steel left on the top of your radiator. Should just be a little rubber seal there. And then on the bottom, if you've got an Aero nose, just put your head underneath there, look around, and you should see seals in there. Okay. And if, let's see, next up would be the air dam. So similar to that seal area underneath the front bumper, there's an air deflector, and that will divert air into the radiator. Now mine, when I bought my car, was not secured very well, and it ended up coming off of the car, and I lost mine, so I did not have that originally. I had to go out and find a new one. Thankfully, the Fiero store actually does make these new still. And the Fiero factory obviously has lots of used parts you can find, and there's junkyards all over the country that you can probably find a air dam at still. There's another part of this. So the GT front bumpers have these two holes in the front, and in a front license plate required states, the front license plate cover blocks these holes. And if you want to get better airflow, I might recommend that you get a license plate cover like what Fiero Kyle did. He made a video, and again, you can see this link in this presentation once it's uploaded, on making a front mount license plate that's kind of off to the side and then actually retracts, so it does not block any air or look ugly, frankly. Okay, pretty low-hanging fruit here. If you got some leaks, this is pretty general, but obviously you might see some coolant on the ground. Typically on a Fiero, it's going to be a greenish color. Now, coolant, it's a little bit sweet to the taste. It's pretty strong taste if if you're not sure what you're looking at. At the same time, let's see. Well, what I would do is I would, check over your car if you see some leak under it. Obviously, this isn't going to be applicable to a big leak. That's going to be pretty obvious. But basically, if you get under your car, see if you can find the highest point where there is liquid coming out. Coolant does not really evaporate very quickly unless you get it really hot. It'll burn off of your engine block, but it will not evaporate if it sits on the floor for a long time. There's some issues or some fixes for that. You might want to check your hose connections, your clamps, or your radiator. Your radiator has a petcock valve on the back that can go bad and leak. Radiator caps can fail. They have seals in them that can get old and dry out. And you also have your overflow tank. I've had to replace my overflow tank before because it was cracked. I don't know why. The Fiero store still makes a coolant overflow tank right now. If you're having a hard time finding coolant leaks, you can buy some ultraviolet dyes. I've actually used this in the last year, and that is a picture of the ultraviolet dye on the bottom, and that is my engine block. So I've got a little bit of a coolant leak out of my heads. I figured out that is a head gasket sealing issue with the steel gaskets that I have on my 3800 engine. I'm actually not going to do anything about that. It's slow enough that it burns off and it doesn't go inside the engine. So you can buy a UV flashlight. They're like 10 or 20 bucks. And you can get some coolant dye. I have the part numbers on the screen, and you can click on the links to get to it. It's only about 10 bucks for a coolant dye for antifreeze. And then if you want to do oil, power steering fluid, and transmission fluid and fuel, it's you can get another different dye for about $10 as well. Rodney Dickman and the Fiero store have some great selections on hoses and other parts for your cooling system that I'm not really going to cover in detail. Okay, so next up is fan motors. Okay, so I see this somewhat common now. These cars are, I mean, they're getting older. Some of them are over 40 years old already. the radiator fan motors can go out, and thankfully they are still being made new. I did try to find Delco parts if I could, but sometimes they're not making every iteration of them. So thankfully you can still buy a new radiator fan motor for every model of Fiero. Now some people choose to cut up the fan housing and replace the fan altogether with a different style, and that's fine too, but it does require some cutting and modification. And I will get into that a little bit later. There's also two different components with the radiator fan. There's also the relays and the fan switch, which I think is covered later in the presentation. So relays can also go bad. Those are pretty easy to pop out. Pretty much just unplug it, plug a new one in. They still make all of those new. And then part of the radiator system would be your blower. It's more of the AC system, but they still do make blower motors. Okay, so clogged or bad pump. This picture, I have no idea how something like that happens. That is crazy, but it just goes to show that it's a good idea to change your coolant every once in a while. Causes of this would be old coolant, or maybe too much cooling system stop leak, possibly mixing incompatible coolants with each other, or kids dropping presents in your overflow tank, your radiator tank. Another symptom might be your pump is just going out. It could just be a bad bearing or and whatnot. This would cause a low pressure, funny smells and just bad cooling. Again, all the radiator pumps are still manufactured by different companies. I can't find OEM parts anymore, but there's still plenty of aftermarket stuff out there. I like to use metal gaskets on this stuff, metal with some rubber molded into it, because those tend to last longer and they can be reusable. Okay, next would be the heater core. I don't know if you remember from that first slide already, but the heater core is a part of your cooling system, and this can go bad. In fact, Fiero Kyle made a video on this recently on every step how to replace this. And I couldn't find an OEM part here, but there are still plenty of aftermarket ones being manufactured. Okay, so I saved radiator for last. Radiators they're pretty difficult to replace compared to the rest of the stuff. However, they're really not that bad. I made that video on it. Well, if you're wondering if your radiator is having issues, you can just look under the front bumper again, and your radiator's right there. And it might be clogged. Now, if you have an AC equipped car, your AC condenser radiator will be in front of your cooling system radiator, so you won't be able to see the front of that. However, you can still pop the hood and look at your radiator from the back. You might be able to just clean it out. Try to blow it out from the rear if possible, since stuff is caught in it from the front. And if you can, you might be able to bend the fins back or something with a pin. Maybe you hit a raccoon or something, and he put a big gouge in the front of your radiator. There's not much protection for Fieros. At least for the front of the radiators, they're pretty exposed down there. Small leaks in a radiator can be repairable. In fact, the OEM service guide is pretty detailed on how to do that. I'm not an expert on that at all by any means. However, if all else fails, then you might have to replace it. So aftermarket companies are making replacement radiators, but I would suggest not doing that. And I'll get to that in 1 second. So other parts, again, Rodney Dickman's and the Fiero store. Again, grab Rodney's parts really quick because this is retiring. In fact, I'm not sure he's selling a lot of stuff that he used to already anymore. He's selling out of stuff pretty quick. Fiero store has some good stuff again. Rock Auto and Amazon are always great go-tos. I usually use Rock Auto to find what parts exist that are out there because they have a lot of stuff cataloged. All right, so upgrade. This is my favorite part. So the biggest single upgrade that you can probably do for your cooling system, and probably also most challenging, is the 3-row radiator upgrade. I have done this. I've made a video on every step you need, start to finish, all the tools you need, all the parts that you're going to need, and some mishaps along the way. So the most common one, or the most popular one, is probably the Champion 3-row radiator. The only modification you need to install this is there are 2 rubber mounts on the bottom of the radiator that need to be trimmed a little bit in order to fit this thing. Otherwise, this radiator is a direct drop-in replacement. It's just 50% thicker, equating to approximately 50% more cooling capability or heat rejection. You might need this if you can't quite get your engine swap cool. In fact, from what I understand, I think V8s, it's pretty common to need this. I always had cooling issues. In fact, the day that I brought my Fiero home, it overheated and burned up the coil pack, and I got stranded actually for it was only about a mile from where I was going to park it. But needless to say, I fixed that and found out that I was having some cooling issues. I'm not sure if my radiator was just old or clogged or whatever, but it was not able to keep up with cooling my 3800. So I opted to swap it out for this upgrade. I actually had an okay time with the 3800 until I got out on the highway and was cruising for, about 15 or 20 minutes or so. It would start getting up to, on like an 85-degree day, it started getting up to, I don't know, 220 degrees or so when I had a 180-degree thermostat. So it was definitely not cooling enough. So fun things about this radiator is I don't know if they make different varieties, but the automatic version will work for the manual. You just don't need to use the transmission cooler ports on it. Just leave them plugged. During the installation process, if you do have an auto, the transmission cooler lines are actually pretty likely to snap off. I broke one of mine. The lower one especially rusts pretty good. So what I would recommend is hitting that with some penetrating oil. I like using the product called Croil. You can buy that online now. It's hard to find on a shelf. Sometimes you can find it at suppliers. But that is probably the best penetrating oil I have experience with. If you don't have that, then you can mix up some ATF and acetone, and that is a pretty good oil and lubricant and solvent. However, I don't think that keeps very, very well on a shelf because the acetone will break the oil down. If you do snap it off, the Fiero store does make replacement lines. Replacement transmission oil cooler lines. Or what I did actually was I got a union and a little pipe cutter and a pre-flared line. You can buy a flaring tool if you have your own line, and you can just splice the line instead if you got enough there to work with still. There are cheaper 3-row options that look pretty good. I know Michael has been running one of these for a while, and he hasn't had any issues with it. Champion is a little bit costly. It's around $270 if I remember right. But there are cheaper ones as low as about $100. I'll just give you a warning. I haven't used those. I haven't tried them. I don't have experience with them, and I'm not sure I'm going to recommend you do that. Like I said, you get what you pay for, so just be warned about that. But Michael's had good luck with his. Okay, so if the radiator is a little bit too much to bite off for you, there is also the fan that you can upgrade. The Fiero fan, the original one, doesn't pull as much air as some of the new ones out there, some different options out there. For what I found, there are 2 different upgrades that have been documented before. Fiero Kyle again did one. He did the Proform plastic 8-blade fan, and I mean, this might be subjective, I'm not sure, but he thinks it pulls a lot more air through his radiator than the original fan. And then there is another one, this guy named Fiero Joe. I'm not familiar with him, but I found his website on the web archive again. He did a 6-blade metal fan, a Permacool 19115, and he has got instructions on how he did that. No videos, but he does have it pictured pretty well. Both these processes do involve cutting into the old OEM fan housing, but you do reuse it for the most part. I don't know how much better the Permacool steel fan was either, but it does have an extra blade than the Fiero fan does. Okay, and then another upgrade option is hood vents. I'm actually working on one right now. In fact, the bottom left-hand picture is a picture of mine. That is my hood currently. Actually, I bought a hood to cut into it because I didn't want to cut my old one. This is a pretty common upgrade to a Fiero regardless. It has a few other benefits besides helping with cooling. It will draw more air through the radiator, helping with cooling that way. But it also will help to keep your headlight covers from popping up above 100 miles an hour. And if you have a Fiero that will go this fast, a swapped Fiero, it will also help keeping your wheels on the ground at 150 miles an hour or more. There's an issue with the Fieros is they're not really designed very well on the front ends to go that fast. What happens is the air pressure kind of builds up under your hood, and it acts as a little bit of a sail, and you will start having the air pressure pop your headlight covers up. And honestly, the cooling path for the air to go through the radiator is not very good, in my opinion. There's not a very good route for the air to enter and then go through the radiator and then come back out. So this will heavily assist in that process. There's a lot of different ways people do this. I've tried two, and I actually think I would do a different one now that I've tried both. There's Trans Am and Firebird parts. That's the two top pictures here. I would probably opt for the one on the right now if I had to redo it again. There is Paul Angel. He used to make all kinds of different styles of hood vents. I like this one the best, called the STM style. However, he has not been making them as much lately due to some personal reasons. But yeah, you still might be able to get in contact with him. He does respond pretty slowly to email, but he will get back eventually, typically in my experience. And then sometimes you might not even need to buy an insert or anything. This is a picture of a Kansas City Fiero Club member, and that I took at the 40th Fiero show. And all he did, he took a Dremel and cut a notch into his hood. And all he did was he bent down the fiberglass hood and then built up a fiberglass wall on the sides, and he's got a vent in his hood now. So you don't really need anything to do it. Obviously, you're going to want to be pretty precise with that and know a little bit of body work. I'd be a little bit scared to do that personally. So I kind of like this. I mean, I think it looks pretty cool, to be honest. Okay, so here is an upgrade, and I have an asterisk on this one. An electric water pump. So I sniped one of these on eBay a little while ago. It's a Messier. Actually, I'll get to that in a second. Electric water pumps they do the same thing as a regular water pump, a little bit differently though. They just use battery power to spin the pump instead of engine power. This will actually save you some horsepower. It will load the alternator down a little bit more, but honestly, I think it saves quite a bit more power than if you were to belt drive it. It's basically just a horsepower gain. I do not know if OEM Fieros actually, if anybody makes an electric water pump for them with the 2.8 or the 2.5 liter engines. I'm actually a little bit illiterate when it comes to OEM Fiero engines because my car did not have one for very long, and I never really worked on it that much. However, most of my knowledge is going to be 3800 related. So Messier, I think it is a company out of Australia. They make a electric water pump for the 3800. And there's actually there's another benefit to these too. Is if you are, let's say you're drag racing your car, and you're full RPM for a run, your engine will get hot, and then you're idling. Well, on a regular engine, with the belt spinning the pump is spinning the pump at the engine RPM. And if you're idling right after a hot run, the pump is spinning slower and it's not going to be cooling as much. The benefit of the electric pumps in this way is they will spin at a much more constant RPM. And so your cooling capacity or capability will be basically constant. So it'll actually help you cool off a lot faster at idle than with a traditional belt-driven pump. Okay, one more upgrade, and I have upgrades in quotes this time because it's actually more of a downgrade for your cooling system. But You can also get an underdrive pulley, meaning a smaller around pulley, so that it'd actually be larger around. You can get a different size pulley that will drive the pump slower. And I don't know about OEM Fiero stuff as much here. I could not find a underdrive pulley being made by anybody after some quick looking, but there might be somebody out there. Anyway, so it's kind of similar to that electric water pump. It'll save some parasitic horsepower loss because it's spinning that pump slower and less of a load on the engine. It will decrease your water flow exactly proportionally to the decrease in size. So it actually will decrease your cooling capability a little bit. With again, the trade-off of being a little bit increase in horsepower. So ZZ Performance makes an 8% underdrive pulley for a 3800 motor. And there's another guy out there, his name's Nathan Herbst. He's on the 3800 page, I think, the 3800 Fiero swap Facebook page. And he will make you a underdrive pulley as well. Nathan actually does a lot of custom stuff. You just have to send him an email or call him and tell you exactly what you want. And he might actually be willing to make a underdrive pulley for OEM Fieros. I have not reached out to him and asked him about that, but I know he does so much custom that he'd probably be open to doing something like that, depending on how much business it'd get him. Okay, so beyond the underdrive water pump pulley, there's also a way to underdrive the entire accessory belt system. One more time, again, I didn't find any products out there for OEM Fieros, but they do make two different underdrive pulleys for 3800 engines. The first one is a 10% underdrive pulley. So your accessory belt drives your alternator, your AC compressor, and your water pump. And so what this will do is it will underdrive all of those by 10%. And so that's going to reduce the parasitic horsepower loss. I'm not sure I recommend that because you might see a little bit of a drop in your alternator voltage and your AC system performance, and obviously your cooling system performance as well. But this is something that guys do custom or could do custom. These, so you can buy this underdrive pulley or balancer pulley. This is the pulley that's on your crankshaft. These are actually SFI rated, and they actually have a better balance than the factory 3800 pulley comes with. I actually put one of these on my Fiero with the 3800 engine in the car, and I made a video on that last year. That was a pretty tough process. I do it on the engine when it's out of the car if you can. But I actually opted for a different type of balancer pulley. I did a 5% overdrive pulley for my supercharger. So if you guys are familiar with supercharged engines, the supercharger is also belt driven, but the belt comes off of a different part of the pulley. So you can get a overdrive supercharger portion of your pulley, or you can get an underdrive accessory belt portion of your pulley. They don't make a combination of both. You have to get one or the other. So I don't have an underdrive accessory belt pulley, but I do have an overdrive supercharger belt pulley. Again, you can see my installation process in my YouTube channel. Okay, next, again, upgrades and quotes. I wouldn't really call this an upgrade because I don't think it really affects your cooling system performance. You know, I don't really know. I tried looking a little bit on this, but I cannot tell what the different compounds of the newer color coolants are, or if they have different heat rejection characteristics or something. But this is what I do know. So the Fiero factory coolant is typically green. Well, they all came with green coolant. That was a traditional water glycol solution. That stuff traditionally had about a 2-year life. And so it is advisable to flush your coolant every 2 years. Now, I don't really drive my Fiero that much, so I don't worry about it. But it does have the potential of crystallizing over time, and you could lose some performance over that. In about 1995, GM switched over to an orangish red coolant called DexCool, is what they call it. That has a longer life. They say it's 5-year or 150,000 miles. The 3800 engine came with the DexCool coolant. So if you do an engine upgrade, you're going to have to make a choice. Do you want to go with the old or the new? And if you do either, you're really going to have to make sure those systems are flushed. unless you go with the next option. There is a newer coolant out there, usually it's yellow, that is called the Universal. Supposedly it can mix with older coolants and not have any issues. You can add it to any type. And it's also got a longer life. It's got a 10-year lifespan. In fact, the guys at the counter say it's basically lifetime. Yeah, that's kind of new to me, but actually, since I've been changing coolant out lately, I started using this stuff. It's not significantly more expensive than the other kinds of coolant. It is ideal if you cannot completely flush your old system and you want to change coolants or you're doing an engine swap. I have a brief article here on different coolant colors. And just so you know, it takes 14 liters to fill up a Fiero. Massive amount of coolant for a car typically, because it's got to run from all the way in the rear, all the way back up to the front. And if you put a bigger radiator in there, you're going to need even more. So you're going to want to buy at least 2 gallons of the full strength stuff. Now, full strength, just for the layman, just means it's concentrated solution. Typically, you will dilute coolant to about 50% water and 50% coolant. If you want to get up in the northern hemisphere more, you might have to do more like 70% antifreeze or coolant and 30% water, or else it could freeze. And I've got a tip here. You can buy a cheap little antifreeze freezing point tester to see what the freezing point of your coolant is if you don't know. For intercooled cars, another tip, if you do have an intercooler like I do on my 3800, use different colors. That way, if there's a leak, you can tell which system it's coming from, your intercooler or your regular engine coolant system. So again, another upgrades in quotes here, because this one's a little bit debatable. But earlier on, remember that there's that thermostat and the fan switch from earlier. So typically from the factory, a thermostat is going to open up at 195 degrees Fahrenheit. They can fail, and they are a maintenance item, so they do need to be replaced once in a while. Again, failure of that would just be it doesn't open up and your car doesn't cool off, or it heats up really fast and doesn't get cool. A common replacement is a 180-degree thermostat. There's some debate out there on whether or not this is actually worth doing. I will say it is probably not going to gain you any sort of performance with your engine power. And if it does, it'd be very marginal, if at that. But what it does do is it can help prevent engine knock or detonation or pre-ignition. What it can do is it can help kind of keep your engine block a little bit cooler, so that there aren't as many hot spots that could cause your fuel to pre-detonate before it's supposed to, or before the spark plug ignites it. That is really more geared towards a higher performance engine. I'm not sure you're going to really need that, especially without a tune, if you're not pushing your timing or anything. But anyways, there's a lot of different options for 180-degree thermostats. You can get ones with or without a hole in them now. There's some debate on whether or not that is actually worth it either. The hole, there's a picture of a thermostat with a hole in it here, just one that I had out in the garage. That will help you with the burping process. If you fill up your cooling system new, it'll help you to vent air out of your system. However, it does have a few drawbacks. It could cause a slightly longer warm-up because there's a little bit of coolant circulating during engine warm-up. It could cause an engine code, and it could actually result in a slight warm-up power loss because that pump is spinning and it is loaded because there's coolant now able to circulate slightly. If the pump's just spinning there without the thermostat being open, then it's not loaded, and it's actually just, you know how a vacuum will actually get faster when you suck against a flat surface? It's because the vacuum pump is not loaded, and there's no air to push against. In the same way, there's no water resistance to push against, really, other than just the static water that's in there. Okay, that's all great, but a 180-degree thermostat won't do anything for you hardly unless you change your radiator fan set points. the way that you do that is in an OEM Fiero, there is a radiator fan switch, and that just bolts into, I think it bolts into part of your intake manifold. I actually don't know because I don't have an OEM engine anymore. But anyways, that's a picture of the switch here on the left, and you can get a lower temperature switch as well. So that means that the radiator fan set point will come on at a lower temperature and keep your engine running at a cooler temperature overall. Now, it's not going to be effective for these things to both come on if your radiator cannot keep up with cooling it to that temperature. So if you have a fan switch and a lower temperature thermostat, it might still get up to its previous operating temperature, like 230 degrees on the highway, or 220 or 210, if your radiator cannot keep up. So you might still have to size up your radiator to get the cooling capacity that you want. In a newer engine like the 3800 engines, you don't have a fan switch. Instead, you would have a computer controlled fan. So you would have to reprogram the computer fan set points, and that gets feedback from the coolant temperature sensor. There are other options out there for even lower temperature sensors. 160 degrees is typically as low as I see. There might even be some out there that are lower. I really don't recommend that. Again, there's always trade-offs with something like this. Trade-off with going too low is your oil is going to stop lubricating as good. Its performance is going to decline the colder that it is. You really should not. I don't think you should mess with that if you want to longevity out of your engines. Guys running 160 degrees are probably guys that build a drag race engine that is planned to be rebuilt after only a couple of uses. So, I mean, I know the guys do run them on the street, but I really wouldn't recommend that. At least not from a long-term longevity perspective. Yeah. Also. I think that was it for that slide. So, okay. And again, hey, you know what? If you don't have a hole in your thermostat and you want one, you can actually drill a little hole out of your OEM thermostat. It's just you can never go back, so you'd have to replace it. Thermostats are not expensive. They're only about, I don't know, $10 or so, and so are these switches and stuff. Okay.
Austin, did you want to take some questions that are
I
popping up?
will after one more slide, and then
Okay,
we'll be good. So,
sounds good.
just a brief note again. I'm a 3800 guy, so like I said, I'm a little bit OEM engine illiterate. This is my diagram on how to set up your cooling system on a 3800 swap, and that can be found in the 3800 swap instructions. Okay, so with that, thanks, Jim. I will take any questions, and if
Sure.
anybody has any feedback or additions, I would love to add that. And I will be uploading this presentation. I'll give it to Jim later on today, and he should post it to the NIFE website for me.
Correct. Yep, we'll get that posted shortly. So let's see. One of the questions that came up, it says, would you recommend disconnecting and plugging the coolant lines that go to the throttle body for someone that lives in a warmer climate? Any
Good
problems that you
question.
might be aware of if I do?
Okay. There's a trade-off with that, like always. So the throttle body, I believe, is typically warmed up from the factory for a couple of reasons. One would be de-icing. I don't know if that's how much truth there is to that one. But the primary one is, I think, engine efficiency as well. So a warmer air going to the engine, although it may be bad for power and bad for knock or pre-detonation on a performance application, it is actually good for fuel efficiency. A slightly warmer combustion will actually burn fuel a little bit more efficiently. So, I mean, I think it is probably negligible. If you just don't care about that as much, you might not really notice a big difference. But yes, typically throttle bodies are cooled or are warmed up by engine coolant, and that's for a number of different reasons. You might actually have slight issues with I'm not sure on older engine applications like on the Fiero if you might get a code set from something like that. I don't know much about the architecture of a 2.8 or 2.5 throttle body, but I can tell you on the 3800, I haven't had any issues with it. So I like to keep my air cool because cool is a little bit better for more power. I'm not as concerned about, blowing gas out the exhaust because as much as I am about gaining power. So again, there's a little bit of a trade-off there. You might trade some combustion efficiency for a little bit more power. Now, if you cannot retune or reprogram your engine controller, I would not bother with that because you're not going to really see hardly any gains unless you can really, take advantage of that by advancing your timing a little bit more from the additional cooling from capacity from the throttle not being heated up. So,
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yep, I think so. Next question is it possible or recommended to use a stock Fiero radiator for a 3800 swap, or should a radiator upgrade be planned into the project?
Okay. I would say don't plan on it, but keep it in the back of your mind because I think some guys do get away with a stock radiator. Now, mine I think was particularly a tired radiator, so it wasn't in good shape and it just could not keep up. And I don't know, take it out on a hot day after your swap is done and see what it does. If you got a 180-degree thermostat in there and a lower temperature set point on your fan, then and it's getting up to 220 degrees, then yeah, I'd say it's time for an upgrade. But some guys do not need that. So from what I've understood, if you might even be able to put a replacement OEM back in. However, I don't think I would do that because it's about the same price as the upgraded versions anyways. So I just send it. I just go for the big one.
All right. And there was
Let me know
a
if I answered your question. So
yep, I think so.
great.
Mike Schmidt made a comment. It says I run the pulleys from Nathan, and he said they're very nice and uh, very helpful for his application for the 3800.
Yep. I love Nathan's pulleys. They're all machined aluminum. In fact, I run like the lightest weight pulleys that I can. Partially because of the parasitic power loss thing. And you can get plastic ones sometimes, but sometimes you cannot get a plastic one. You have to buy steel. But he'll make an aluminum one, which is lighter than steel. So I like his pulleys a lot.
Okay. Next one, did you want to discuss a little bit of the burping method when filling up antifreeze in the Fiero, the coolant?
I skipped that because there's articles written on that specifically, but I can describe it briefly. The way that I do it, I've never had any issues with it. I filled up mine multiple different ways. You just want to get your car a point where you can fill your radiator from at very high. So put your car on your sloped driveway or something, or park it on jack stands or whatever, and make sure your radiator is above the engine or your overflow tank. I've done it that way. Probably a better way is to have the engine up high and fill it from the rear. What I'll do, I've never actually had to burp. What I'll actually just do is I'll just pour coolant in, and I have that thermostat with a hole in it, and I'll just let the coolant sit in the reservoir that I have on my engine, and I'll just let it sit for like a couple hours or a day, and I'll just consistently go back and just keep filling it up. And
Mhm.
once it's full enough, I'll start it, and that'll typically suck some air out of the system, and I'll just let it run. And then as it's running, I will continue to fill up the coolant again from the highest point. I don't really have a picture of this, but I've got a little radiator or a coolant fill port or cap on my engine. And I'll just keep filling that until it's completely full. I don't like to take the thermostat out to do that. Some guys do that to try to because the car has to warm up before coolant starts circulating when that thermostat opens. Because I have that little hole in mine, I don't really think I need to do that. So I've had pretty good luck with it. If you don't burp it properly, you might hear some gurgling or some surging or something where, yeah, but I honestly have never had an issue. So it hasn't been that challenging. There's other write-ups on it. I just kind of, did it without reading on how to do it. And, but anyways, earlier in the presentation on that first slide, I do have the other articles, and there you go, changing the water pump, filling, burping, and venting. So if you need any more information, there's where to go.
Excellent. All right. Next one is what is your take on the durability comparison between the 2.8 V6 and the 3.8 supercharged? It says some say the 3.8 has better lubrication.
Frankly, that's I don't know. All my experiences with the 3.8 engine works good for me. I can't really say. I do know that I don't know. I think that the old 2.8s are not quite as reliable from long-term perspective as the 3.8s are. But I don't know. I can't really answer that question.
All right. The next one, it's from Amanda. I'm not sure, Amanda, if you wanted to unmute yourself, but the question is, what method do you recommend for routing heater hoses, i.e., should I use modified 2.8 water neck on an 86? I am using Fiero low alternator mount. I'm not quite sure I follow that question. So
Are you
Amanda,
talking
if you want
about
to
on a
do
3800 application or OEM stuff?
Yeah, Amanda, if you wanted to unmute yourself, you could elaborate on that if you
Hey,
want.
this is Amanda's husband, Chris.
Okay. Hey, Chris.
I'm working on Amanda's car. It's an 86 GT, and I've seen a few different methods for connecting the inlet and outlet of the heater hoses. So I'm using the alternator delete bracket from Fiero.
Oh, okay.
And I've seen I can't remember all the names. I know, Austin, one of your videos talks about this, and it's one of those gray areas. I'm not sure what the best thing is to do. Some people take the 2.8 water neck and weld it to the 3800 water neck. So yeah, we're
Yes,
doing the
okay.
swap.
Tell you what, I am going to pull up. You guys can still see my screen, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to pull up my swap instructions real quick. If anybody asks me a question, I got to go here because it's all written down. Okay, so build one. One second, guys. I know it's getting pretty long these days, but I've got that new tool that will help, hopefully. Okay, build one cooling section. So let's see. Okay, so if you're asking about heater hose, right here is what everybody does. They pull the heater hose off of the the lower intake manifold from the 3800. There is that coolant elbow there that goes straight to the heater hose. And unfortunately, on an 86, I don't remember how those are set up, but on an 88, the heater hose goes out here, out the front of the intake manifold on the right here, and it comes back and it returns to. It's actually welded into the pipe, the coolant pipe, the return coolant pipe. So it's kind of its own little loop that leaves and then rejoins the coolant circuit. So I have all the part numbers here on the hoses you use, except for the heater hose to an 86. I think it's too short, or it's shorter than the 88, like an 87, like my car. But so you might have to get a custom length heater hose for that. But everything else, I think, should just work this way. Now, you were talking about coolant fill and heater hose. I don't pull off of the coolant fill spot for the heater. I go out of the lower intake manifold. Now, if you had a question about the coolant fill thing, this is what I use. It's number 2 up here. Actually, I used a different one, but this one's a lot cheaper. That's it. Basically, just a little T, and I plug off this this little nipple port here on mine. So this goes from the thermostat housing output side on the car to the the coolant hose on the that goes up to the radiator in the front. So two separate things. Heater hose I handle separately from the filler neck. I like this filler neck here. It could be a little bit taller, but it's for $20. It's really not a bad gig. Like I said, just jack up the rear of the car, and you might have to like manually hold the hose a little bit higher just to get a little bit extra height out of it. But this thing works great. Yeah, I mean, the West Coast Fiero has a a filler neck that's a lot taller. I think it's right here. And it's kind of a hybrid, like what you said. That's probably what you're thinking of right there. Oh boy, that's tiny. There you go. That's probably something what you're thinking of. You can make something like that by welding the 3800, I think the 3800 and the OEM housings together. But I wouldn't bother with that personally. This thing is super easy. Just drop right in, just drop it and go. So, and it's pretty cheap too. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it. This is a pretty popular version of that, but let me see the price on the West Coast Fiero one. How much is it? I think it's, oh my goodness.
Wow.
$225. So there you go. That's why you do the $20 option. Anyways, did I answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, so I think the difference in the 88 to 86 or earlier versions is the heater connection that you talked about being wired into the radiator connection.
Yep.
I think it's actually not that way, and it's an individual heater hose on the driver's side.
Okay, so if it's an individual heater hose, probably modify this diagram for that. So you could probably get a T over here and basically just copy this setup right here for the return.
Michael Schmidt made a comment here. It says, I run mine. This is regarding the burping discussion. It says, I run mine after burping, let it cool, then repeat the burping process. It is important in the 3800 install to drill the 2 1/8 inch hole in the thermostat. To drill quantity of 2 1/8 inch holes in the thermostat, like seen in Austin's picture, so the coolant can flow until it reaches temperatures and then opens. So,
yep.
All right, there was a comment in the chat that says the 86 factory service manual and 22P parts manual illustrates the correct heater hose routing. So Austin, if you wanted to incorporate that into your drawing, that would give you some guidance as far as the heater hose routing for the 86.
Thanks. I'll see if I can find that.
Because both of those are available at fieroinfo.com in PDF form, so you can reference that. Another comment that just came in the chat, it says Rodney Dickman offers an Underdrive pulley system for the stock 2.8 liter for $190.
Ooh, I did not know that. Thank you. Tell you what, I will add that to the presentation and re-upload it later.
He just posted a link to the in the chat feature.
Power pulley kits. Oh, okay. Calling it different terminology. That's the problem there. All right, awesome. Okay, so Rodney does make an underdrive pulley for Fieros. Awesome. For OEM engines. Oh, they're different depending on what year. Okay. So it looks like it's for the V6 only.
Now, when you burp your cooling system, do you do anything special with the air that's in the heater hose line near the heater core, or you just let that burp out over time?
Over time, that point is a lot lower than the thermostat, so the air will eventually, as long as you run the engine a good amount and let it warm up sufficient, it will probably drive the air out of there, as long as you've got a higher point than that in the system.
Austin, thank you for the knowledge and insight that you provided on the Fiero cooling system. We appreciate your time on a Saturday morning.
You are welcome.
But yes,
right.
Eventually we will be posting this on our website. So if you missed the link today, you can keep an eye on FieroFocus.com in the coming days, we will get that uploaded.
Okay,
So,
well, guys, I really appreciate you having me out today. Yeah, I hope I covered it all. But yeah, if you guys want to get in contact with me again, here's how to do it. Where'd that slide just go? There it is. So Facebook is easiest. I'll respond fastest there, and email as well if you guys don't have that. If you don't have email, I'll take smoke signals too. So.